This is a download from the BBC. To find out more and for our terms of use, please go to bbc.co.uk. Hello. Would you like to interview your boss and ask him or her some tough questions? Well, that's what I'm going to do this week in the last edition of the series, when the controller of Radio 4, Gwyneth Williams, comes into the feedback studio. Some of you think she has a lot of questions she needs to answer.
I'm appalled at the news that excess baggage is to be axed from Radio 4. Really would urge the controller to keep this programme. It's different, individual. Saturday Live, on the other hand, is quite simply a radio version of the One Show.
I've written about the World at One being extended to 1:45, which I think is a retrograde step. I'd much rather have the half hour that we used to have, which allows for nice programs like a Round Britain quiz and all sorts of things like that.
Really well done, arts graduates. Another science program reduced to a level where you alone will be interested in it. And all we want are perhaps a couple of programs a week made by scientists for scientists.
We'll put those points and more to the controller shortly. And we ask that much maligned subspecies, the youth of today, how they like their news.
Listen, watch, share.
This is BBC Radio 1.
And we're asking you for some help tonight too. BBC Radio 4 wants to hear from you on what you think about Newsbeats. It's for its feedback programme, which goes out at...
But first, I hope you had an enjoyable Easter. It was hardly barbecue weather, so judging by our correspondence, many of you wanted to spend the time catching up on some radio listening. Of course, the great thing about podcasts and Listen Again is that you can listen whenever and wherever you want, making the unmissable unmissable. Isn't that right? Well, it's the theory anyway. In fact, listeners often tell us that favourite programmes haven't made it onto the iPlayer as advertised, or editions of podcasts are unaccountably missing for days, and the problem seems to get worse during holiday periods.
Hello, I'm Chris Wimlett. I live near St Andrews in Fife. I was contacting feedback to express my frustration at the unreliability of the Radio 4 podcast service. On 2 occasions, instead of getting a pair of Any Answers, Any Questions podcasts, I just got Any Questions twice. On another occasion, Any Answers appeared on the Saturday, but the associated Any Questions didn't appear until the following Tuesday. It is very frustrating if you don't get the podcasts that you're expecting.
My name is Jane Bourne. Last Friday, feedback was not available and some other programs, although many programs were. And I was also very sad to not be able to listen to David Willey, Archive on 4, the Rome correspondent. The programs are more likely to be missing on Friday, Saturday and Sunday, which of course are wonderful days for listening.
Very disappointing. Listener Jackie Rice wonders if that missing edition of Feedback might possibly have anything to do with the fact that in that particular programme we were talking about the overhaul of the BBC complaints system. But we weren't the only victim, so conspiracy or cock-up? Dear listener, we have tried so very hard to find out. We started by asking to speak to the network manager of Radio 4. He was on holiday. Then we tried Radio 4's interactive editor. He was on holiday. Then we were told that it was a technical and not an editorial query, and we should speak to a different department. The press officer there was, oh yes, on holiday. Could there be a pattern emerging? Finally, we managed to track down someone who was actually at work and asked the obvious question. Were the problems anything to do with half of Radio 4 apparently being on holiday? In response, we were given this statement.
The programmes mentioned by your listeners are usually uploaded to the podcast service at the same time each week, but occasionally issues, such as being recorded on location, can cause a short delay. Unfortunately, sometimes the wrong episode is uploaded because of human error, which is what happened with Any Questions. We would like to apologise for this. The failure of those programmes listed to appear on iPlayer over the weekend was caused by a technical problem. This has now been rectified.
Well, there are more bank holidays coming up in a few weeks, of course, so do let us know how the service holds up then, or falls down. And if you're listening to me now via iPlayer or the Feedback podcast, well, congratulations. I wonder if they'd get away with that kind of apparently relaxed approach over at Radio 1. I doubt it. their audience would soon take them to task.
Now here's Newsbeat with Chris Smith.
Listen, watch, share.
This is BBC
Radio 1.
Interactivity is at the heart of our sister, or is it daughter, network. For example, while Radio 4's Today programme does occasionally read out listeners' tweets and emails on air, Radio 1's Newsbeat makes listener comments a regular feature of the programme, and the audience seems to appreciate it. On the programme's Facebook page, Douglas Thompson comments, "What's good about Newsbeat is how normal folk can get involved in current issues, which can only be a good thing." But for Samuel Basin, that inclusive approach can be risky. He emailed us to say, "Please do not dumb down the news for Radio 1 listeners." He thinks important international events are sometimes bumped down the news agenda on Radio 1 to make way for stories about alcohol and sunbeds and Mario Bellatelli's latest piece of bizarre behaviour. He says just because it's aimed at a younger audience doesn't mean we don't understand the news. We're not idiots. Well, 3 Newsbeat listeners who are certainly not idiots are taking part in this week's Feedback Listening Club. They got together to discuss Newsbeat during lunch break at their school in Whitburn, West Lothian.
Hi, I'm George. I've always listened to Newsbeat. I've been listening to it for the last 5 years.
Hi, I'm Ryan. I probably didn't listen to it as much as I should have, but now I'll be listening to it a lot more and a lot more often.
Hi, I'm Rachel. I'll tend to listen to Newsbeat online. So if something's caught my attention and I really like it, then I'll go back to Newsbeat on iPlayer to listen back to see what the news was about.
And you have been in touch about this story today, and a lot of you not happy about the drive to get more ethnic minorities into the armed forces. This text from someone who didn't leave their name. It says, "More potential terrorists in the army."
I think Newsbeat has a lot of opinions and sort of quotes from other people, which I'm finding a bit too much. Because I remember listening to a programme and they were saying, "And this is Claire," and I didn't really know who Claire was. I just wanted to know more facts. I wanted to know what's happening with the fuel crisis now. Why is this happening?
Yeah, I mean, like, everybody has their opinions, and we'll talk about that at home to, like, our families or our friends. We don't need to hear somebody's specific opinion on the radio.
I quite like that about it because it's great to have that good mix of facts and opinions because it's a lot more relatable, it's a lot more relaxed, and you're thinking, oh, Claire thinks the exact same as me, and it's good that you're not alone with your opinions. You put your opinion in, and so you can't complain about, oh, nobody listens to young people.
Well, if ministers got that badly confused, it's possible some of you did too. So, with our guide to what a jerry can actually is...
I think the DJ presenters have a very informal tone, but it's not too informal that it becomes sort of chatty and they're not really respecting the news. But it becomes where you understand it and it's easier and more comfortable to listen to them, to talk to you.
Yeah, it's definitely not patronising at any means. It's very realistic and sometimes can be very harsh, but it helps us to learn to handle these type of harsh stories.
The reporters they use are really good as well because you feel like they're actually genuinely interested in what they're talking about. They say it in a way so it's not dumbed down, so that it's just saying a couple of words at a time. They're speaking to you, it's almost like they're speaking to you like adults.
Hundreds of children are being tortured by the Syrian army, according to the United Nations. They claim authorities have been deliberately targeting children throughout the conflict in the country.
They give you short headlines and you're just sort of left there in a daze wondering, well, I wanted to know more, so what's happening?
Yeah, because it's still important things that I'd like to know about, but it's kind of like this tortured children, then shot soldiers, and kind of like, well, what happened there? Well, why did they get tortured? Why were they shot?
Teenagers are really interested in celebrities' lives and how they lead them, and I think they're more wanting to know about the celebrities rather than saying fuel crisis or someone got shot in the army. I think they're more interested in that.
That's true, but that's really, really stereotypical teenager. And I think if an adult were to say, you're interested in music and football, you'd be like, no, that's wrong. We're interested in way more things than that.
Comes back to the timing. Everything deserves its even slot and everything deserves like 2 minutes worth. And if a celebrity story is worth that, then yeah, why not stick it in? Because although it doesn't appeal to me, it will appeal to the wider audience.
First, though, an American teenager has been told he'll spend the rest of his life in jail for shooting dead 2 British tourists.
I think the music's kind of distracting you because it becomes the point where it's a bit too loud and you're starting to follow the beat with it with your hands or your feet.
I disagree. It's a news programme. It's not about the jingle in the background. It's about the main stories that you're telling us and how realistic it is.
But then again, I think if you're listening to the news and then you hear a sort of really harsh, dramatic sound, you think, right, okay, they're going to tell me something serious, and you give it a bit more attention.
BBC Radio 1. Scott Mills.
Lots of people asking when I'm going to play my big thing tonight.
All of a sudden you're listening to the news and then a random trailer comes up about the next programme and you're just thinking, it's sort of wasting time.
Yeah, I think when they've got the trails right in the middle of a show, it's really, really off-putting. I just like to know that Scott Mills is going to be playing a song or talking about this. It's not of any interest to me when I know that they're cutting out time of important news.
BBC
Radio 1
Newsbeat.
Last week...
Annoying trails? Well, I never. Wouldn't happen on Radio 4. Our thanks to George, Ryan and Rachel. Now we're hoping, nay, expecting, that the relatively new controller of Radio 1, Ben Cooper, will accept our invitation to come on to Feedback next series and discuss some of those points. So do let us know what else you'd like us to raise with him. And if you'd like to take part in a listening club, do get in touch with some details about your group and the programme you'd like to talk about. Contact information coming up shortly. Now, a couple of weeks ago in Feedback, we looked into In Our Time's predilection for using what's known as the historic present when talking about events which happened in the past. Gareth Jones was among a number of listeners for whom Lord Bragg and his chums' insistence on using the present historic is getting very irritating.
I think we're in danger of losing our past tenses, as everybody, particularly presenters and contributors to such programmes as In Our Time, uses the present tense when talking about past events.
OK, so he's born in 1770 in Cockermouth in the Lake District. His father works for a local aristocrat. His mother dies when he's 8, so he's sent off to a little village school.
Hearing that galvanised hordes of listeners to rush headlong into the grammatical fray. Listener Mike Johnson said it's a subject he's been meaning to email me about for some time.
How I cheered. Mind you, it startled the family and scared the cats. I don't think this is what Zen Buddhists mean when they talk about living in the moment.
I'm Jane Potter, and I'm a teacher of English as a foreign language. I know the historic present is used to add drama to a narrative, but when it's used all the time, it loses its dramatic effect. It can also confuse, as the present simple or historic present is used to denote a habit or something which is generally true. For example, I go to work every day. So when this tense is used throughout a programme, it's sometimes difficult to decide whether the speaker is talking about something that's generally true or a habit, or something that actually did happen in the past.
Martin Callister says it's not just In Our Time that's guilty.
Worse than the irritating effect of this linguistic affectation is the confusion that this causes in another Radio 4 programme, and that's Jonathan Friedland's The Long View. Two sets of circumstances, one in the present and one from the past, are being compared, and to use the present tense for both series of events, especially when frequently switching between them, just has to be confusing.
And even the sainted Libby Purvis gets caught in a linguistic time machine.
Chris Reynolds. When you played the piece on Feedback the other week, it reminded me of an episode of Midweek from a few months ago.
To be honest, I didn't particularly want to play the pipes. I wanted to play the violin. But then when I started, I had to go on somebody else's set of pipes. And
How old are you now?
How old am I now?
No, I mean, how old were you then at the time, at the moment when you first picked up the pipes?
I probably would be about 10.
And I nearly fell off my chair.
Is there no one who will champion the poor, oppressed, historic present? There is. Melvin, hang about, no, not that one. Melvin Tisdale girds his loins and advances to do battle.
There's absolutely nothing wrong with this. If you look at Lord Randolph Quirk's comprehensive grammar of the English language, you'll see that they describe it in there as being correct use. If you consider a past event as told in a joke, a horse walks into a bar and the barman asks, "Why the long face?" And its use in describing history brings life into what is sometimes a dry subject.
That's enough of the past, even when it is in the present. Let's look to the future. This is the last of the current series, but we continue to need your correspondence as the east of England needs rain. Without it, nothing will flower. So do please keep writing to Feedback, PO Box 67234, London SE1P 4AX, or please leave a phone message on 03 333 444 544. As you know, standard landline charges apply, but it could cost you more on some mobile networks. Or you can email feedback@bbc.co.uk. All those details are, as usual, on our website. Now, time to stiffen the sinews for the interview with the boss. Gwyneth Williams became controller of Radio 4 at the end of 2010. Since then, she's introduced arguably the most significant changes to the Radio 4 schedule for over a decade, and she hasn't finished yet. She's commissioned new series and decommissioned others. She's also extended programmes, like The World at One, and now Saturday Live, the latter up from 60 to 90 minutes. To create space for that extension, she's announced the end of Excess Baggage as a separate 30-minute programme. It will now exist only in a truncated form as a feature within the new Saturday Live, which will now have two presenters, with Sean Williams joining the irreverent Reverend Richard Coles. When I met Miss Williams on Wednesday, Gwyneth that is, the first thing I put to her were your critical views on these changes.
It's Rosa Jones from Cambridge. As far as I know, it's the only programme about travel on Radio 4.
Walking back to the vehicle, came around the corner, and there is the sister of this tiger stalking us down the side track along the side of the road.
It can't be a very expensive programme because often contributors have written a book or something. I imagine they do it free. John McCarthy is a very genuine-sounding person. He's not slick like some of the presenters. And as a sort of armchair traveller, I find it a very interesting programme, and I'd be sorry if they stopped it.
And I kind of realised, I said to my guy that this is an accident waiting to happen. We need to get out of here.
My name's Stephen Berridge, and I live in Crediton in Devon. I'm appalled at the news that Excess Baggage is to be axed from Radio 4. Really would urge the controller to keep this programme. It's different, individual. Excess Baggage invites the listener to concentrate. It can inspire you to further thought and to research. Saturday Live, on the other hand, is quite simply a radio version of The One Show, which I choose to avoid.
So Gwyneth Williams, our listeners think you've axed the wrong programme. Why not keep Excess Baggage and get rid of Saturday Live?
I think Saturday Live catches really very well the mood of Saturday morning. I know that many people really like Excess Baggage. For that reason, it's not being axed.
Well,
Saturday...
it's ceasing to exist as a separate programme and is being subsumed, or elements are being subsumed within Saturday Live.
Indeed, that's true. But Excess Baggage will still exist within Saturday Live. I wouldn't like to swear it's every week, but that is the plan at the moment.
I still can't understand the rationale for this, because it's clearly Excess Baggage is a successful programme. Saturday Live is a successful programme. There are lots of people who like it, some don't, but a lot of people like it. Yet you're putting the two together. For what? Because you think you can hold on to a larger audience at 10 o'clock than you would be if you don't do this?
Well, no, let me try and explain. The reason for putting them together is because I think that the nature of travel has changed a good deal over the years, and I think that Saturday Live will benefit from the inclusion of a discussion about travel as part of its magazine programme. So I think by putting them together, we'll get a more interesting, eclectic and stimulating whole, which I hope will be inspiring.
Can we turn now to your coverage of science? There are some people, as you know, who really miss Home Planet, who thought it was really good. But on the other hand, they thought we were promising really interesting science programmes, and some of them think what they've got really are personality programmes masquerading as science ones. Here's Ray Lampard, for example.
Well done, arts graduates. Another science programme reduced to the level where you alone will be interested in it. After a half-hour interview with the guy who designed the CMS detector at CERN, I've heard no mention of what those letters stand for, or how it works, or what problems were overcome in building it. I do, however, know exactly how excited he was at various moments in his life and the name of his school teacher.
I had a very inspirational physics teacher. This is in Birmingham, King's Norton Boys Grammar School, and his name was Howard Stockley. And he made time to...
This is a specialist interest of a substantial minority, and all we want are perhaps a couple of programmes a week made by scientists for scientists.
Well, I actually heard this programme about Jim Verdi, and we've done a great deal of programming on Radio 4 about CERN, but actually Jim Verdi himself was the father of all of this. He inspired so many people to join the CERN project. And I don't think his story, his tale, and the way he inspired people, that story is really not very well known outside a rather small group of scientists.
You see, a lot of people would say they agree with you that that sort of personality interview is invaluable, but what is being sacrificed in their view is a programme which has more science within it. I mean, to quote, for example, Andrew Lane, who looks back on Home Planet, he says, that was the epitome of Radio 4, accessible, informed, even-handed and enthusiastic. Now, he says, I find some other science programmes too personality-led. Do you think that, in a way, in order to get science, as it were, accepted as a regular part of Radio 4, you have laid a little too much stress on the personality and not on the science itself?
Well, no, actually, I disagree here, because these aren't programmes designed for scientists. These are, if you like, literate programmes about science. They're designed for everybody. And we still have science programmes which focus very much on the science. True, we no longer have Home Planet, but we do have extended editions of Costing the Earth, for example. We have So You Want to Be a Scientist. We've had many different scientists and different kind of science discussed at 9 o'clock. Jocelyn Bell on astronomy, Michael Marmot on the science of stress, and what I wanted to do, and what I think is beginning to work on the network, is a rather fuller discussion of science.
Can we move on to another change that you made, the extension of the World at One? Tell us why again, remind us again, why you extended the World at One.
Well, the original reasons for extending World at Once still hold. I think that Radio 4 listeners at lunchtime need a substantial news and current affairs programme, and now they've got it. The news agenda was coming around far more quickly than before. The cycle had changed. There was a chance to make more news at lunchtime. And we knew that when we spoke to listeners that they wanted something that was longer and more in-depth.
Well, let's listen to some listeners now. Let's hear what they have to say.
My name's Matt Taylor. I'm from Walthamstow in northeast London. I think the last 15 minutes are not really being used in the way that Gwyneth Williams said they would be when she was interviewed by Roger last year. And it seems to me that what they're really doing is using them for magazine features. I had a quick listen to what was on last week's final 15 minutes, and there were at least 2 occasions where they were plugging people's books. There was also a celebration of 40 years of Newsround, which is a brilliant programme. But again, I thought that was more of a media show type programme.
Hello, my name is John Moore from Chudley in Devon. Generally, everything can be covered in what's going on in the world in the half an hour. On the days that there's some sort of emergency, it's always been extended to 3/4 or even an hour. I'd much rather have the half hour that we used to have, which allows for nice programs that I've always listened to, like our Round Britain quiz and all sorts of things like that.
Sir Gwyneth Williams, do you think that the World at One staff have seized the opportunity because, in the view of Matt Taylor, for example, instead of the longer interviews and the in-depth items you were looking for, they've been running magazine features?
Well, I think that clearly was the case on the day that this listener heard the programme. But this programme has also been making a good deal of news. Just recently, last week, with the Francis Maud interview, when he gave the interview about jerry cans.
But he would have given an interview anyway, wouldn't he? Martha Carney or any of your other presenters would have given them a tough time in half an hour, not necessarily 45 minutes.
Indeed, they would have, but they perhaps wouldn't then have been able to hear Ai Weiwei, the Chinese artist who was engaged in a webcam protest in China, where he was putting webcams about his house, and whilst they were on air talking to Ai Weiwei, he was told by the Chinese state to take down the webcams, and the protest was forcibly halted. So they wouldn't have had an interview like that.
You're not going to reverse your decision then. You think that on the whole, Watto has made good use of the extra 15 minutes.
I think Watto are doing well. It is still early days. We haven't had hard data back yet. True, some, and I've just heard listeners here, and their points I take very seriously, are not comfortable with the extended Watto, but many seem to be enjoying it. So we'll just have to wait and see how it develops.
Can I ask you about 4 Extra, because it's noticeable when you look at the figures for 4 Extra, and the last ones we've got are for December 2011. I think the next ones are not due out to May. It's gone up by not far short of 75% in the 12 months from December 10 to December 11. But I also noticed the head of programming is retiring. I don't think he's going to be replaced. Does this mean that your strategy for 4 Extra is changing?
The strategy for Radio 4 Extra is to continue very much as it currently is. It is fundamentally an archive network.
But you're taking a significant amount of money out of it, aren't you?
I'm taking out some commissioning money, and a reasonable amount of the commissioning money I'm taking out.
How much?
However, that had been...
How much are you taking out?
The commissioning money at the moment is going down by...
Well, I've heard that it's around about a quarter. Is that true?
Yes, yes, it certainly will be about that.
Well, that's a strange thing, isn't it? It goes up by 75%. It's a successful network. And as a result, there's no longer a head of programming, and the budget is reduced by 25%.
No, let me explain.
Really?
Let me explain this. The strategy for 4 Extra is that, and it always has been, that it's a fundamentally archive network. I had to make some cuts across Radio 4 and 4 Extra. I did put more of the cuts on the internal Radio 4 management, actually, as well as on 4 Extra in order to protect Radio 4. However, I genuinely know that the cuts to 4 Extra will not make a substantial difference to the offering to the audience, and we will still retain quite a degree of original commissioning.
Can you tell me what's coming up on Radio 4? Have you got any more seasons in mind?
Well, we've got quite a lot of treats coming up. One is Bloomsday on the 16th of June, which is going to be a whole day and doing Ulysses.
And you've got a big Shakespeare series coming up, haven't you?
Yes, we've got Neil McGregor starting next week. I really recommend you listen to Neil McGregor's take, because he's talking about the world as it was in Shakespeare's time through objects that were part of the world of Shakespeare's audience.
Now,
he's obsessed with Scottish witches, I can tell you that.
Yeah, some people might think you're obsessed with these series. People like David Lees, who says 1 or 2 programmes broadcast recently have not been about the Titanic. Could you please find out who is responsible and ensure that they are held to account for this disgraceful state of affairs? You can overdo these seasons.
You certainly can. I hope we haven't with the Titanic. I've been quite selective, in fact, but I agree that you can overdo these things.
Listener Jane Fleming is one of many who asks, can Radio 4 please be an Olympics free haven? Can it?
Well, I think it's unlikely that Radio 4 will not have any mention of the Olympics. I have a little treat in store. I'm not sure whether to tell you about it now. Perhaps I'll hold
go on.
it.
There are only 2 of us here in the studio. Please tell me.
Perhaps you can wait for that one, since I've told you about Bloomsday.
Right.
But we do have a little treat in store for the Olympics. And honestly, listeners, I can tell you, you've got teams of producers out there in the independent sector and in-house who are really working hard to make these programmes fly.
We never sleep. The controller of Radio 4, Gwyneth Williams. And do let us know what you think of the alleged Olympics treat when it is revealed. We'd also love to hear your thoughts about the new Saturday Live when it launches at the beginning of May, and about Neil McGregor's 20-part series on Shakespeare, which starts on Monday. And, of course, about anything else you hear while we're off air. We're not off reading or listening to your correspondence. And finally, this listener has come up with what must be the best justification for public service broadcasting I've ever heard.
My name's Olivia Gray. I'm just listening to feedback at the moment, actually.
Oh, good.
I'd like to say that Paddy O'Connell and the wonderful Eddie Mair prevent me from shooting myself at least once a week. The news has been so bad for so long, and to have it delivered with their delightful senses of humour. Thank heavens for their, I was going to say levitation, but I mean levity as well. Hurrah for both of them.
And so say all of us. I'll be back in 7 weeks, when we should be very close to hearing who the new DG will be. The chairman says he or she will need the wisdom of Aristotle and the striking power of Wayne Rooney. And the advert out this week says that the successful candidate, and I quote, will be able to admit quickly when in the wrong. Well, I hope I and you get a chance to find out. Goodbye. System. But we weren't the only victim. So, conspiracy or cock-up? Dear listener, we have tried so very hard to find out. We started by asking to speak to the network manager of Radio 4. He was on holiday. Then we tried Radio 4's interactive editor. He was on holiday. Then we were told that it was a technical and not an editorial query, and we should speak to a different department. The press officer there was, oh yes, on holiday. Could there be a pattern emerging? Finally, we managed to track down someone who was actually at work and asked the obvious question. Were the problems anything to do with half of Radio 4 apparently being on holiday? In response, we were given this statement.
The programmes mentioned by your listeners are usually uploaded to the podcast service at the same time.
The half hour that we used to have, which allows for nice programmes like a Round Britain quiz and all sorts of things like that.
Really well done, arts graduates. Another science programme reduced to a level where you alone will be interested in it. And all we want are perhaps a couple of programmes a week made by scientists for scientists.
We'll put those points and more to the controller shortly. And we ask that much maligned subspecies, the youth of today, how they like their news.
Listen, watch, share.
This is BBC Radio 1.
And we're asking you for some help tonight too. BBC Radio 4 wants to hear from you on what you think about Newsbeats. It's for its feedback programme, which goes out at...
But first, I hope you had an enjoyable Easter. It was hardly barbecue weather, so judging by our correspondence, many of you wanted to spend the... This is a download from the BBC. To find out more and for our terms of use, please go to bbc.co.uk. Hello. Would you like to interview your boss and ask him or her some tough questions? Well, that's what I'm going to do this week in the last edition of the series, when the controller of Radio 4, Gwyneth Williams, comes into the feedback studio. Some of you think she has a lot of questions she needs to answer.
I'm appalled at the news that excess baggage is to be axed from Radio 4. Really would urge the controller to keep this programme. It's different, individual. Saturday Live, on the other hand, is quite simply a radio version of the One Show.
I've written about the World at One being extended to 1:45, which I think is a retrograde step. I'd much rather have
time catching up on some radio listening. Of course, the great thing about podcasts and Listen Again is that you can listen whenever and wherever you want, making the unmissable unmissable. Isn't that right? Well, it's the theory anyway. In fact, listeners often tell us that favourite programmes haven't made it onto the iPlayer as advertised, or editions of podcasts are unaccountably missing for days, and the problem seems to get worse during holiday periods.
Hello, I'm Chris Wimlett. I live near St Andrews in Fife. I was contacting feedback to express my frustration at the unreliability of the Radio 4 podcast service. On 2 occasions, instead of getting a pair of Any Answers, Any Questions podcasts, I just got Any Questions twice. On another occasion, Any Answers appeared on the Saturday, but the associated Any Questions didn't appear until the following Tuesday. It is very frustrating if you don't get the podcasts that you're expecting.
My name is Jane Bourne. Last Friday, feedback was not available and some other programs, although many programs were. And I was also very sad to not be able to listen to David Willey, Archive on 4, the Rome correspondent. The programs are more likely to be missing on Friday, Saturday and Sunday, which of course are wonderful days for listening.
Very disappointing. Listener Jackie Rice wonders if that missing edition of feedback might possibly have anything to do with the fact that in that particular programme we were talking about the overhaul of the BBC